Okay, this is one that I want to show you, okay, which is a maths lesson that, if you like, I actually came across this first as a geography lesson. And I'm going to play this out with you, George, if that's okay, and see if you've seen a lesson a bit like this before. Have you seen this kind of content taught before?
Look, I don't think so, but you're putting me a bit on the spot, Pauline, so I'm getting a bit nervous.
That's okay. So basically, what we have here is a graph. Okay. So it's telling you that it's a yearly temperature graph for two cities every month of the year. Okay. And so the idea here is to answer the questions that are coming up. So, what questions do you expect are going to be asked of the students at this point?
Maybe the first question, as written, look at this average yearly temperature graph for the two.
Yeah. And then what might you ask about it?
To do some sort of comparison for specific months of the year.
So you might say, for example, how much hotter is it in Dubai than Juneau in February?
Yes,
You might ask a question like that, right? What else
yes.
might you ask?
Um, the pattern that we
Okay.
observe for each. Are there any similarities?
Ah, all right. So basically, uh, how would you describe the pattern as it appears on the graph?
Well, as we as we move from January to February to March to the middle of the year, obviously the average temperature is increasing. And then from about, what is it, July, August, the temperature decreases. By the time we get to December, um, it doesn't appear to be increasing or decreasing in a linear fashion. Um,
Okay. So, how about I'll put it to you that somewhere in your schooling, potentially, right, you've come across a lesson a bit like this. And the questions that you might be asked might look a bit like this. Okay. Who had the highest temperature? When did it happen? Lowest temperature? When did that happen? And, you know, when was it zero? Right? You might get
yes,
questions like, what's the difference between two temperatures? Does this look familiar? The sort of
yes, it does.
questions you might you
Yes, it
might see.
does. Yeah, yeah, it
Okay.
does.
And oh, look, we did, in July and February. I didn't even realize it was February. But yes, right. So that's the sort of questions that you might expect to ask of your
Yep.
students if you are teaching this kind of content.
Mm-hmm.
This is where I came across a second way of approaching this content. I'm going to show you this. And the question is, what do you wonder? This is in a class situation. Okay, so the whole class is looking at the board and I've put these up. What do you wonder?
Um, just looking at the slide, I'm thinking you're going to ask the question, which city fits which of those graphs?
Lovely. So at this point, after the students have figured out that's what's going on, if I let them at it and let them basically fight it out between themselves in their table groups, then what do you suppose would happen in this lesson?
Well, there'll be some group engagement going on, which is good, which is what we want.
Mm-hmm.
Now, in terms of coming up with the correct responses, not sure. Not sure.
Okay. What kind of conversations do you imagine people having?
Well, they'll be looking at the temperatures, obviously, for the respective graphs. They'll try maybe to relate on personal experiences, students that have been interstate. Um, if they haven't been interstate, they might sort of draw on, having listened to mum and dad talk about their experiences when they've been interstate. But certainly, engagement with, real everyday situations where they're trying to make a connection with.
So I should give this a bit of context. I haven't taught them anything yet. I haven't taught them how to read a graph. And this is the entire context that they're seeing. Okay, this is the first lesson, if you like. So what tends to happen at this point is that, first of all, they'll go, what on earth is J and F? Okay, once they figure that out, then they start arguing, right? They say, well, look, that one's got to be Darwin because it looks really hot, right? And some kids say, how is it really hot? And they'll go, well, because the temperature is really high. You can see there on the side, it's like 30 something. And then they're pointing to it and they're explaining that is what they understood to be 30 something on that graph. Then they'll be like, somebody will say, that one's Canberra because I know that Canberra is really, really hot and also really, really cold, right? Or that one's Hobart because it's really cold. I don't know, right? All these sort of things, right? There are things about this lesson that unfortunately aren't showing up in this particular slide I've got here, because you can do this lesson with other cities, right? You can choose cities from overseas. And so basically, if you had, for example, Anchorage in Alaska, right, they would go into negatives, okay? And there will be students teaching each other what a negative number is. And there will be students saying, it's got to be in the Northern Hemisphere because the graph is upside down. It goes the other way. And then they're talking about all of their personal experiences. There will be students who have potentially had little success in maths, but they can bring in some of their own personal experience to bear that other people don't know. The number of things that happen in this class is phenomenal, and I didn't have to teach a thing. And at the end of it, they all know how to read a graph. And this lesson changed my life, because until I came across this way of teaching, I'd only known the other one, right? Where you give them a graph and you ask them questions. This one, after I saw it in action, I'm like, I got to do this, because basically what it means you can do is to structure your content as a teaching strategy, right? You structure your content so that the students have just enough to be able to make sense between themselves. And it completely changed the way I taught. So I just thought I might throw that out there as an example of a teaching strategy that made sense to me.
And I'm sure it makes sense to many. Great strategy.
So I might just finish off with this. What we're doing this week, actually, is a teaching strategy that I like to call yarning, which is, I suppose, an Indigenous term often used for storytelling, right? And the way that people pass on knowledge through generations, through their experience. And what we're going to have are, I rounded up a bunch of really good friends, and they're going to talk about strategies that they have used and find useful and what led them to do these things. And I'm hoping that listening to them, you can get more insights than you can get just from the two of us, right? Because, takes a village and all that sort of thing. So those will be coming up in separate audio files. Okay. I think that's it from us, George.
That's it.
Thank
Absolutely.
you so much for listening.
Yeah. Thanks, Pauline. Bye, everyone. Bye for now.
Thanks, George.